The first question I always ask on this show is kind of meant to kind of break the ice a little bit. What are your favorite drinks right now? What have you been drinking, alcoholic or not?
I've been drinking tequila and beer together.
So even for breakfast, like just
Well, I'm not much of a morning drinker, but when I do drink in the afternoons or wherever it's nice, it's usually a tequila with water and ice, like a regular drink, and a beer. And I'll take a sip of that tequila, I'll hold it in my mouth, and then I'll take a beer and put it in at the same time and swallow them both together. It's a great way to do it if you've never done it.
I'm gonna have to try that. That actually does sound interesting to me, very much so. I love tequila and beer, so
But does
uh,
it burn when it goes down if you do it that way? It doesn't burn your esophagus.
that's very
So,
smart. I'll have to check that out.
yeah,
Definitely. All right, so
yeah.
usually when I have a musical guest on the show, typically the first really nuts and bolts question I like to ask is about your early influences and memories. But I mean, your early influences and memories are well documented already. I mean, you are the son of one of the founders of rock and roll. What was it like growing up around such transcendental artists? I mean, just always in your ear, so to speak.
Well, man, before I was around the Elvises of the world, I always heard talk about Howlin' Wolf and Little Milton and the different ones that my dad, the different black artists that Rocket 88 with Ike Turner and Jackie Brinston and those things. And so, I was indoctrinated early on. And uh, like my dad said, two of the artists that he wished he could have worked with more were Howlin' Wolf, and that's the one he said where the soul of man never dies
Hmm.
was in Howlin' Wolf, and then Charlie Rich. Which it seems like there's a stretch there, but
Yeah, somewhat.
he, feel is feel, no matter who it's coming out of. But if it's not there, I don't care what color you are or whatever, it's not there. But if it's there, it's there. And Charlie Rich had feel, and so did Howlin' Wolf, and I've got a tattoo actually of a howler wolf on my arm.
Amazing, amazing. And Memphis was just a different time back in those days musically as well than it is now, but we'll get into that. As a child, this is always an interesting question that I like to ask a second generation person within the music business, such as yourself. As a child, it was probably normal for you to have access to some of these big artists and iconic sounds of an entire generation. When did you realize that this was not the typical experience for a kid?
Well, I think probably it was a normal experience for me, but those guys came: Elvis, Johnny Cash, Jerry Lee Lewis, all those guys came. Charlie Rich, Roy Orbison. Roy Orbison lived with us for 2 weeks, but I think when Elvis, after my dad sold Elvis to RCA, and around 1958 or 59, when he was coming out there, and he was already a huge star. It was still real exciting to be around Elvis, but it wasn't like being around my brother or something. Elvis was a very big star, and it was a great experience. And he would just drop by sometimes. And first he'd call, and my mother or my father would answer the phone and say, "Hey, is it cool for me to come over tonight?" And they'd say, "Yeah." Most of the time they'd say, "Come on." And he never was by himself. He was always with 10 or 12 other people, and I always saw the best looking girls I've ever seen in my life at that point. But yeah, it was a great, man, and they were cool enough to wake us up and say Elvis is coming over. You guys want to miss school tomorrow? And of course the answer was yes, and we learned. I've said this on some different interviews, but we actually learned a lot more staying up all night with Elvis and that whole thing than we it did if we'd have gone to school the next day. And at that time, Elvis. I don't want to talk too much about Elvis, but he wasn't drinking or anything. It wasn't like a big drunk party or anything, or drugs or anything going on. It was like Elvis was just he'd drink coke and smoke some cigars, but that was about as wild as it got. And it was a lot of music being played there. Had
Mhm.
guitars around and that kind of stuff. And
And
I kind of decided that's what I wanted to do. When I was around those type of guys.
yeah, and I mean, he was a night owl too, so I mean, he was pretty well known for just wanting to get up and do something, anything overnight.
Well, he had to be because if he went out in the daytime,
Yeah,
he would
he'd
get
get
mobbed.
swamped, absolutely. Yeah, so he had to
Well,
do it
and,
that
and
way.
all those guys eventually were that way. But Elvis, I think, was the first it really had, that was an issue for him. It really was an issue for him.
Yeah. So, in my opinion, I really wanted to talk about this with you because I think, as famous as your dad is, I still don't think he gets enough credit for what he's done for the music business, especially today. I mean, you look back at the things that he did and had the power to do and change. I feel like your dad was pivotal in the way mainstream music was not only produced at the time, but also presented to the public in a manner that absolutely did not discriminate. Right? He was instrumental in not only allowing music to see race at a time that could be really dangerous. Um, what things do you what things did that teach you, not only as a man but also as a musician?
Well, my dad, of course, he was raised on a tenant cotton farm, and he picked cotton alongside black cotton pickers. And so he had told me several different times that the black cotton pickers had a little different rhythm from the white cotton pickers, the way they pick cotton.
Yeah.
And he didn't say either one was better than the other, but it was different. And so I think my exposure to his exposure to feel in music, and I think that's what he was always after, was feel. And
Right.
he had the ability to draw out of people more than they thought they had in them.
Hmm.
And he always said it was kind of psychological, record producing, psychological. And don't call attention to the microphone, and don't make it a nervous situation when you're in the studio, which is normal to kind of get a little bit nervous when the tape's rolling, and
Yeah.
and
Absolutely.
you're out there by yourself. It's totally unlike a live gig where there's things you can kind of hide behind, live. But in the studio, it's just you, man. And so he had a way of getting things out of people that they didn't know. And all those guys that came in there, man, they were just really straight out of the country. A lot of them were cotton pickers too, and they didn't have any uh, you know preconceived notions other than they wanted to be after Elvis, particularly the white guys. They After Elvis came along, they saw a chance, to make it, and they had a similar backgrounds as Elvis, poverty. That's what they came out of, and they
Hmm.
ended up making a pretty good living in the music business.
Well, 70 years ago, the landscape of music was completely different than it is now. I mean, your dad, in my opinion, was one of the first engineers to actually allow people of color to produce music that kind of represented who they were culturally. Whereas, a lot of the other mainstream companies, I'm not going to name any names, were trying to get people of color to sound more white, right? Always trying to make them sound more white. And your dad was not that way at all. He just got what he got and never tried to shape who or what they were, trying to sound like. And that's what I'm talking about. Where I don't think your dad gets enough credit in kind of the lack of separation in music. He kind of was instrumental in blending all of that together, not just in the way that Elvis was, perhaps doing music of color, but also allowing the people of color to record their own music.
Well, he always told me that he told his black artists, particularly, but all of his artists, but starting with his black artists, he said he would tell them, "Don't play for me what you think I want to hear. No, I just want to hear what you've got inside of you. I want you to bring that out. I don't want you to try to sound like anybody else." 'Cause I don't think he made this up, but he has told it to me before that you might as well be yourself because everybody else is taken. So that was kind of his mantra recording, is that he wanted what was way down deep inside of yourself. He wanted you to bring it out, not be fearful of doing that. And so that's how he dealt with every single one of his artists, white, black, or whatever. He was after their soul, and
Yeah.
he had to give them permission to make mistakes and to feel free enough to get out way out there on the limb to where they might make a mistake, and then we have to take it again because you have to remember that this was all one track recording at the
Mm-hmm.
time.
Yeah.
Mono. There was no overdubbing or fixing it in the mix or anything like that. It was either get it right or
Do it
do
again.
it all over
Yeah,
again.
do it
Yeah,
again.
which I
Yep.
think is not a bad way to do it, man.
Mm-hmm.
Really, because just people today, I think, is are dependent upon we'll fix it in the mix or we'll fix it later or we'll tune my voice or whatever. And my dad would have been listen. He'd have been all over Pro Tools as far as
Oh,
the. It was always about technology and getting better technology, but I don't think he would have tuned anybody. You know what I mean?
yep.
If they couldn't sing, I don't think he would make them not. I don't think he would help them with their singing part of it. Or move spaces closer together if there's a little too much space between the guitar riff or whatever. But I mean, it's my album, for example. We when we went to cut my album for the universe, we cut. Everything I sang was live with the band, the tracking part of it. We did overdub some. The overdubs like strings and horns and voices, but the tracks were cut live with everybody there, and they had never heard the songs before. They had wanted to hear some demos, and my daughter, who's one of the producers on this thing, we both decided that they didn't need to hear the demo because we didn't want them to be prepared
Mm-hmm.
already of what they were going to play.
So very old school. I love that. We'll definitely get into the record. Most of this episode is going to be on your record. It's incredible. I can't wait to talk to you about it. But I want to give credit where it's due. And man, I feel like 70 years ago, your dad was absolutely instrumental in changing the way we consume music nowadays, and just a hugely instrumental person within the business. Not even musically, just business wise.